Winter has a way of changing everything. Sound disappears beneath the snow. Distances feel longer, and silence becomes heavy, thick enough to feel. When the world slows down, when nights stretch endlessly, and the cold settles deep into the bones, strange things begin to surface. Memories, shadows, stories that were never meant to be told out loud. Tonight's stories don't come from dark alleys or abandoned cities. They come from quiet places, from forests buried in snow, from runways swallowed by storms, from moments when help was close, but never close enough. These are not tales of monsters chasing you. They are stories of waiting, of being watched, of warnings that arrived too late. What you are about to hear happened during winter nights, when the world was silent and no one was listening. So dim the lights, put on your headphones, and if you hear something outside, don't look too quickly. I used to believe that childhood places stayed frozen in time, that no matter how many years passed, no matter how far away you went, the streets you grew up on would always feel familiar when you returned, safe even. I was wrong about that. Places remember things. Houses remember voices. And some things don't stay buried just because we stop talking about them. I hadn't planned to ever come back to that town. When my parents died, the news reached me through a brief phone call from a lawyer. 2 deaths, months apart, both quiet, both ordinary. There was no dramatic farewell, no final confession, nothing that felt unresolved. At least, not on the surface. The house was left to me, everything inside it untouched since the last time I'd stood in those rooms as a teenager. My wife suggested we go there together. She said it might help me say goodbye properly. She said our son was old enough now to understand where I came from. She said a few weeks in winter wouldn't hurt anyone. I didn't tell her that I had spent most of my adult life trying not to remember that place at all. We arrived on a night when the snow seemed endless. The buildings looked smaller than I remembered. The streetlights cast dull halos that barely reached the ground. The silence was the first thing that unsettled me. Even the sound of our car felt muted, swallowed by the snow. The house stood exactly where it always had. Same peeling paint, same narrow porch, same crooked mailbox that never stayed upright. The windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the night behind us. And beside it, looming just beyond the fence line, stood the old oak tree, the wishing tree. It was dead. The realization hit me harder than I expected. I had always imagined it would still be there, alive and unchanged, as if it had been waiting. Instead, its branches were skeletal, its bark split and gray, its trunk leaning slightly as though exhausted from standing too long. Seeing it like that made something in my chest tighten painfully. I didn't say anything as we unloaded the car. I didn't point it out to my wife or my son, but I felt its presence the entire time, watching, silent. That night, as we settled in, memories began surfacing without invitation. Ruby. She lived in the house next door. We met when we were 5 years old, two children drawn together by boredom and proximity. Ruby was quiet, observant. She had dark hair she kept tied back and eyes that always looked older than the rest of her. Her father was rarely around, and when he was, people avoided him. He smelled like alcohol and anger. Everyone in the neighborhood knew to keep their distance. But Ruby was different. She was gentle, curious, lonely. We spent most of our time outside, especially near the oak tree that stood between our yards. Ruby called it the wishing tree. She said her grandmother had told her stories about it, how it listened, how it remembered every wish ever whispered to it. I believed her. We both did. We told the tree everything, things we didn't tell our parents, things we didn't even fully understand ourselves. Ruby talked about wanting to leave town someday, about wanting to be somewhere warm, somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. I talked about wanting to be invisible. The tree heard it all. Ruby disappeared when we were 7 years old. The official story was that she ran away with her father. People said he had finally lost control, taken her, vanished. There were searches, questions. But after a while, the town moved on. Children always do. Adults pretend to. I remember standing by the wishing tree weeks later, whispering her name into the bark, asking it to bring her back. It never did. Standing in my childhood bedroom that first night back, I couldn't sleep. The walls felt closer than they used to. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold wood. Around midnight, I walked downstairs and stood by the living room window. That's when I saw the motion sensor light turn on near the tree. It wasn't sudden. It brightened slowly, deliberately, as if something had stepped forward and waited. I watched for movement, for shadows, for anything. There was nothing. The light turned off after several seconds. I told myself it was just old wiring, but it happened again the next night, and the next. Sometimes it turned on for only a moment. Sometimes it stayed on long enough for me to feel uneasy. I never saw anything beneath the tree, but I had the overwhelming sense that something was standing just beyond the edge of visibility. A few days later, my son mentioned the girl. He asked me why she stood outside at night. I asked him what girl. He said, "The girl in the tree," he said matter-of-factly. My wife laughed it off, said children imagine things when they're somewhere new. But my son insisted. He said the girl talked to him, that she said she had been waiting, that she didn't want to be left behind again. That night, I dreamed of Ruby. She stood beneath the tree, snow collecting in her hair, her face pale and still. She asked me why I never came back, why I left her there. I woke with my heart racing, the echo of her voice still in my ears. Things began to feel wrong after that. The house felt colder, no matter how high we turned the heat. My wife complained of feeling tired, restless. She said she had strange dreams she couldn't remember. Some mornings, I found the back door unlocked, snow tracked across the floor, though no one remembered going outside. Once, I found her standing in the kitchen before dawn, staring out the window toward where the tree used to be. She said she thought she heard someone calling her name. One night, I woke up alone. The bed was cold beside me. I followed the sound of wind through the house and found her outside, barefoot in the snow, standing where the tree had been. Her lips were moving, whispering softly. When I touched her shoulder,
She gasped, as if waking from a dream. She didn't remember leaving the bed. She didn't remember going outside. That was when I knew we couldn't stay. But before we left, I had to do something I had avoided since childhood. The tree had to be removed. I told myself it was for safety, that it was rotting, unstable. But deep down, I knew the truth. I needed to know what it had been hiding. When the workers began digging around the base of the tree, their tools struck something solid almost immediately. They stopped. They called the police. What they found beneath the roots was small, human bones. The truth spread quickly through the town. Ruby hadn't run away. She hadn't left at all. She had been there the entire time, buried beneath the place she trusted most. That night, as the snow fell quietly over the disturbed earth, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the empty space where the tree had stood. I thought it was over. I was wrong. My wife came into the room, smiling softly. But it wasn't her smile. It was Ruby's. She said she had waited a long time, that the tree remembered her, that she didn't want to be left behind again. And as she stepped closer, I understood something that chilled me more deeply than the winter air ever could.
I didn't rent the cabin because I wanted peace. I rented it because I wanted to feel nothing. That winter had a way of stripping meaning from things. Days blurred together until time itself felt optional. Conversations felt distant, as if I were listening from another room. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, it brought dreams I didn't want. Silence, I thought, might help. A place far enough away that no one could reach me. A place where I didn't have to pretend to be okay. The listing described the cabin as remote but comfortable. The photos showed a small wooden structure surrounded by snow-covered trees, smoke curling from a chimney into pale sky. No neighbors, no roads in sight, just forest. When I called the owner, he sounded older than I expected. He asked a lot of questions, more than someone renting out a place usually would. He wanted to know how long I planned to stay, if I had experience driving in winter conditions, if I understood that there would be no cell service. I told him I did. There was a pause near the end of the call, a hesitation. "The back door lock is old," he said finally. "It works, but I wouldn't trust it too much. Just make sure you secure it properly at night." I laughed, made a joke about bears. He didn't laugh back. The drive north felt like crossing into another world. Snow thickened gradually, softening the landscape, muting sound. Towns became smaller, farther apart, until they stopped appearing at all. The last gas station sat alone at the edge of a road swallowed by trees. The attendant warned me about an incoming storm. I nodded and kept driving. My phone lost signal not long after that. By the time I reached the cabin, daylight was fading fast. It sat in a clearing just off the narrow road, almost hidden. The trees pressed close, their branches heavy with snow, creating a natural wall. The cabin itself was small, dark, and still. Snow lay undisturbed around it, no footprints, no tracks. Inside, it felt colder than I expected, even with the heater running. The air smelled faintly of old wood and something metallic. Everything was simple, practical. There were no personal touches, no signs of long stays. This was a place people came to briefly,
then left behind. I checked the doors. The front door was solid, heavy, reassuring. The back door, however, shifted slightly when I tested it. The lock clicked into place, but the frame gave just enough to make me uneasy. I ignored it. That first night passed quietly. The fire crackled softly, wind brushed against the cabin walls, the kind of wind that sounds alive when you're alone. I slept deeper than I had in months. The second night, the silence changed. It's hard to explain. It wasn't louder. If anything, it was quieter, but it felt occupied, like the absence of sound had weight. I became aware of how loud my own movements were, the scrape of a chair, the rustle of clothing. Even my breathing sounded intrusive. I was sitting at the small table reading when I heard the crunch. Soft, distant. Another crunch followed, closer this time. Footsteps. They weren't hurried, they weren't erratic. They moved with intention, each step placed carefully, as if whoever was outside knew exactly where they were going. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped near the side of the cabin. I waited, heart beating steadily but fast, telling myself it was an animal. Deer often wandered through these areas. So did wolves. But animals didn't walk like that. Animals didn't pause. The steps resumed, circling slowly. I turned off the light and waited. After several minutes, the sound faded into the forest. I didn't sleep much that night. The following evening, I cooked dinner in silence, hyper-aware of every noise. The wind picked up, rattling branches against the cabin. Snow fell steadily, thickening the isolation. Around midnight, I heard a knock. 3 soft taps against the front door. They were too deliberate to be accidental. I didn't move. I didn't answer. The knock didn't repeat. Instead, I heard footsteps again, crunching through the snow, moving away from the front door and toward the back of the cabin. The handle rattled. The lock held, barely. I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the door, my mind racing. Whoever was outside didn't try to force it. They simply tested it. Then they waited. Eventually, the footsteps retreated. Morning came slowly. When I stepped outside, the evidence was undeniable. Footprints, large, deep, human. They came from the forest, circled the cabin once, then disappeared back into the trees. There were no other tracks, no vehicle marks, just those footprints, half filled with fresh snow. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, considering my options. I stayed. The third night was worse. The storm arrived without warning. Snow fell thick and fast, swallowing the world beyond a few feet. The cabin felt smaller, the walls closer. The silence pressed in harder than before. I was lying on the couch when I heard the back door strain. A sharp crack split the air. The door burst inward, snow blowing across the floor. He stood there, tall, broad, wrapped in dark clothing, his face hidden beneath a hood pulled low. He didn't rush, he didn't speak. He simply stood in the doorway, snow collecting on his shoulders, watching. I ran. I slammed the bedroom door shut and shoved the dresser against it, then the bed. My hand shook violently. Outside, I could hear him moving through the cabin, slow footsteps, measured, unhurried. He stopped outside the bedroom door. I could hear his breathing, calm, steady. There was no urgency in it, no panic. It was the breathing of someone in control. I crouched on the floor, covering my mouth, terrified that even the sound of my breath would give him away. Minutes passed, time warped, my muscles ached from tension. Eventually, The footsteps moved away. The front door opened, closed. Silence returned. I didn't sleep. When dawn finally came, pale and weak through the storm clouds, I emerged from the bedroom. The cabin was empty. The back door hung open, snow piled inside. Outside, fresh footprints led away from the cabin. There was blood in the snow, just a small amount, enough to make my stomach drop. I left immediately. I never returned. But winter doesn't forget. Years have passed since that night, yet when snow falls thick and the world grows quiet, I feel it again, that pressure, that sense of being watched. Sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps outside my door. Slow, careful, deliberate.
Night shifts change the way you perceive time. When the world sleeps, hours stop behaving normally. Minutes stretch. Silence grows dense. You begin to measure time not by clocks, but by the sound of equipment, the flicker of lights, the rhythm of your own breathing. That was something they never taught us during training. I started working nights at the airport because I thought I could handle isolation. I was wrong. The airport sat on the edge of northern Minnesota, far from any major city. 2 runways, 1 control tower, a terminal that went dark after midnight except for emergency lighting and the occasional hum of a vending machine. During the day, it felt ordinary, quiet but functional. At night, especially in winter, it felt abandoned. Snow changed everything. It swallowed sound, softened edges, reduced the world to a narrow circle of visibility surrounded by nothing. The runway lights became the only anchors in the darkness, small, steady points stretching into white emptiness. I was 24 when I took my first permanent night assignment. Young, eager, proud to finally be trusted with solo shifts. Most nights were uneventful. Cargo flights, medical transports, weather reports, long hours of monitoring screens and listening to radio chatter that rarely carried anything urgent. I learned the sounds of the tower, the low hum of electronics, the faint click of switches, the whisper of wind against the glass. I learned when silence meant nothing and when it meant something was wrong. The storm that night didn't arrive suddenly. It built slowly, almost politely, as if giving the world time to prepare. Snow began falling in the late afternoon, light at first, then thicker as evening approached. By midnight, visibility had dropped significantly. Wind pushed snow sideways, erasing the horizon. I logged weather updates and coordinated with a single inbound cargo flight scheduled to land shortly after 1 a.m. That was when I noticed her. At first, it registered as movement, something out of place among the uniform white and black. I leaned forward in my chair, squinting through the glass of the tower. Near the far end of runway 2, a figure stood motionless. My first thought was that it was equipment, a marker, something left behind by ground crews. But as my eyes adjusted, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human, a woman. She stood alone on the runway, barefoot, wearing a long white dress. The fabric hung loosely, catching snow as it fell. Her hair was dark and loose around her shoulders. She didn't wave, she didn't move. She simply stood there, facing the tower. I checked the radar immediately. Nothing. No ground vehicles, no personnel scheduled outside, no alerts. I keyed the radio. "Tower to all ground units," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Confirm no personnel on runway 2. Silence. I switched frequencies and contacted the inbound cargo flight. "There appears to be a person on the runway," I said, Can you confirm visual? There was a pause. Negative, the pilot replied. Runway is clear. I looked back out the window. She hadn't moved. She was closer. Not by much, but enough that I noticed. A cold sensation spread through my chest, sharp and immediate. I instructed the pilot to abort landing and hold. He questioned it, but complied. I documented the incident and contacted airport security. By the time their vehicle reached the runway, sweeping headlights across the snow, the woman was gone. No footprints, no disturbance. Security found nothing. They joked about fatigue, poor visibility, stress. I laughed with them because that's what you do when you don't want to be the person who sees things. I tried to focus on my duties. The temperature inside the tower began to drop. At first, I thought the heating system was malfunctioning, but the thermostat hadn't changed. The air simply felt colder, heavier. My breath fogged faintly in front of me. Then the radio crackled. Static filled the room, rising and falling like distant wind. I reached to adjust the controls, but the radio switched channels on its own. A voice broke through, distorted, urgent. Get out before it burns. I froze. The words repeated, fragments cutting through static. Get out before it burns. I stepped back from the console. That was when I saw her again. She stood on the catwalk railing just outside the tower window, close enough now that I could see her face. It was pale, too pale. Her eyes were dark, sunken, fixed at me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. Snow collected on her shoulders and hair, but she didn't react to it. Her bare feet rested lightly on the metal railing, as if gravity itself treated her differently. She raised one hand slowly, not to wave, to point, down the runway, toward the lights, toward something I couldn't see. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. When I looked again, she was gone. The cameras showed nothing. Every feed was empty, clear, unchanged. The radio screamed with static. The temperature dropped further. I didn't think. I ran. I grabbed my coat and bolted down the tower stairs, leaving consoles lit, radios active, logs unfinished. Snow hit my face like needles as I ran toward the terminal. I didn't stop until I was inside, gasping for breath, hands shaking uncontrollably. I quit the next morning. Didn't give notice, didn't explain. Weeks later, curiosity pulled me back into the past. I searched archived incident reports, maintenance logs, weather records. I found her story buried deep in an old file from 1988. A small private plane, a winter storm, a crash short of the runway. One survivor, a bride. She had been traveling alone after her wedding, still wearing her dress when the plane went down. Injured, disoriented, she wandered the runway barefoot, trying to reach the tower for help. She never made it. She froze to death in the snow. Since then, controllers reported strange sightings during winter storms, equipment malfunctions, radio interference, a woman in white seen on the runway, always during heavy snow, always warning, never saved. I don't work night shifts anymore, but sometimes when snow falls thick and the world grows quiet, I hear radio static in my dreams and a voice whispering, "Get out before it burns."
Winter eventually passes. Snow melts, lights return, and life continues as if nothing happened. But for the people in these stories, something was left behind, a memory that never fades, a silence that feels too familiar, a sense that some places don't forget what happened there. If these stories stayed with you, if they made the night feel a little quieter than before, then they've done what they were meant to do. If you enjoy late-night horror stories like these, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive. And if you have a story of your own, something that happened on a winter night, something you've never been able to explain, you can send it to whisperedbox@gmail.com or reach out through our Facebook page. Until next time, stay warm, stay safe, and remember, silence is never empty.